Carter Malachi had spent most of his life working land that never gave anything away for free. Every harvest, every paycheck, every quiet victory had been earned with sore hands and long days. He wasn't the type of man who demanded special treatment. In fact, most people who met him described him the same way: quiet, patient, respectful. But on that afternoon, 35,000 feet above the ground, one tiny printed date on a meal tray would test every bit of patience he had. And before the flight landed, someone's career would be over. The first-class cabin was unusually calm. Most passengers already had headphones on or laptops open. A few were sleeping. Others stared out the windows while the aircraft cut through bright white clouds. Carter adjusted his seat and rubbed the stiffness from his shoulders. The past week had been exhausting. His family farm outside a small town in eastern Texas had finally secured a contract to supply organic produce to several regional grocery chains. Years of sacrifice had finally started paying off. The trip had been his first real vacation in nearly 4 years. He wasn't wearing expensive designer clothes like some passengers around him. Just clean jeans, polished boots, a button-down shirt, and an old leather jacket that had been with him longer than most friendships. Some people looked at him and saw another country farmer. They never imagined he owned nearly 2,000 acres of productive farmland or employed dozens of local families. Carter had stopped caring what strangers assumed years ago. A flight attendant rolled the meal cart beside him with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Chicken with vegetables or grilled salmon?" "The salmon sounds great, thank you." She placed the tray in front of him and continued serving other passengers. Carter always had a habit that puzzled people. Before opening packaged food, he checked expiration dates. Years of handling crops, fertilizers, and food shipments had made it automatic. He picked up the sealed yogurt. Still good. The butter, fine. Then the main meal. His eyes stopped. He looked again. The small printed label wasn't hard to read. Used by 2 days ago. He frowned. Maybe it was a packaging code. He turned the container over. No. It clearly stated the meal had expired 48 hours earlier. Carter didn't panic. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited until the flight attendant returned down the aisle. "Excuse me, ma'am." She turned with an impatient expression that hadn't been there a few minutes earlier. "Yes?" He held up the unopened meal. "I think there may have been a mistake. This entree appears to be expired. Would it be possible to replace it?" She barely glanced at the label, then she shrugged. "It's fine." Carter blinked. "I'm sorry." "It's airline food. Those dates aren't always what passengers think they are." He looked back at the container. "It specifically says use by." She sighed loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Sir, if you spent less time inspecting every little thing, your food wouldn't get cold." A couple of passengers looked over. Carter remained calm. "I understand. I'm only asking for a meal that hasn't passed its use-by date." The flight attendant folded her arms. "Honestly, you're making an issue out of nothing." The cabin suddenly felt much quieter. Several nearby passengers had stopped what they were doing, and one businessman across the aisle quietly lowered his newspaper, watching every second of the exchange. Carter Malachi didn't respond right away. He had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than anger ever could. The flight attendant stood beside his seat, her arms crossed as if she had already decided the conversation was over. "I understand flights get busy," Carter said calmly. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just don't think passengers should be served food that's already past its use-by date." She gave a short laugh that sounded more dismissive than amused. "Sir, I've worked this route for years. Believe me, it's fine." "It may be," Carter replied. "But if it's fine, why print a use-by date at all?" For the first time, she looked slightly irritated. "You know what? You're the only person who's complained today. That doesn't necessarily mean the food is safe." Her expression hardened. "Or maybe everyone else understands how airlines work." Several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Across the aisle, the businessman who had lowered his newspaper earlier quietly picked up his phone. He wasn't recording openly, but he was clearly paying close attention. The woman seated behind Carter leaned forward just enough to see the label on the meal container. She frowned. Did that really expire 2 days ago? The flight attendant immediately answered before Carter could. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. The woman leaned back, surprised by the sharp response. Carter kept his voice steady. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm simply requesting another meal. The flight attendant let out an exaggerated sigh. We don't carry unlimited meals. I understand. So you'll have to eat this one. Carter looked down at the unopened tray. I'm not comfortable doing that. She tilted her head. Then don't eat. The words hung in the air, not loud, not shouted, but cold enough that several passengers looked directly toward them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Carter reached into the front pocket of his jacket and pulled out his phone. He wasn't dramatic about it. He simply opened the camera, took a clear photo of the meal label, another of the tray, and one showing the seat number. Click, click, click. The flight attendant's expression changed instantly. What are you doing? Documenting the issue. You can't photograph airline equipment. I'm photographing the food that was served to me. Delete those pictures. No. Her face reddened. I'm asking you politely, and I've politely asked for a replacement meal. The businessman across the aisle finally spoke. He has every right to document something served to him. Another passenger nodded. I probably would have done the same. The flight attendant looked around, clearly realizing the attention was no longer on her side. Instead of calming down, she became defensive. You people don't know the policies, Carter answered quietly. Neither of us needs to argue. If replacing the meal isn't possible, I'd appreciate speaking with the lead flight attendant. I am handling this. I'd still like to speak with your supervisor. She stared at him for several seconds. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. You know what your problem is? Carter met her eyes. No, what is it? You people always think someone's out to get you. The words landed like a punch. The cabin went completely silent. The businessman slowly lowered his phone. The woman behind Carter covered her mouth in disbelief. Even passengers wearing headphones had begun looking over after noticing the sudden tension. Carter didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her back. Instead, he pressed one button on his phone. The audio recorder began running. He placed the phone face up on the tray table. Then he looked at her with the same calm expression he had carried through every hardship life had thrown at him. Ma'am, he said evenly, would you mind repeating what you just said? The confidence on her face disappeared for the first time. She realized in that single moment that this wasn't just about an expired meal anymore. It had become something much bigger. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever loved someone with a truly pure heart, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss these amazing stories. The flight attendant froze. For the first time since the conversation began, she looked uncertain. Her eyes shifted from Carter's phone to the passengers watching from nearby seats. The confidence she had carried moments earlier was gone. I don't need to repeat anything, she said, trying to recover. Carter remained composed. That's your choice. He stopped the audio recording, but he didn't put his phone away. The photos of the expired meal, the visible use-by date, and the untouched tray were already saved. A few rows back, a middle-aged woman raised her hand. Excuse me, she called out. I heard what happened. The gentleman asked very politely. Another passenger nodded in agreement. He never raised his voice, the man added. He only asked for a fresh meal. The flight attendant looked around, clearly realizing that the situation had slipped out of her control. Just then, another crew member approached after noticing the growing crowd of curious faces. Is everything all right here? She asked. Before the first flight attendant could answer, Carter spoke calmly. I was served a meal that expired 2 days ago. I politely requested a replacement, but instead, I was told to either eat it or go without. I'd also like to report an inappropriate comment that was made to me. The second crew member looked down at the tray. She picked up the container. Her eyebrows lifted the moment she saw the date. She checked it again. Then she looked directly at her coworker. This meal shouldn't have been loaded onto the aircraft. The first flight attendant quickly interrupted. It's just a labeling issue. The second attendant shook her head. No, our procedure is very clear. Anything past the use-by date must be removed before boarding. Several passengers exchanged looks. The businessman across the aisle finally stood. I witnessed the entire exchange, he said.
This gentleman remained respectful from beginning to end. So did I, the woman behind Carter added.
Within seconds, 4 more passengers quietly voiced the same thing. The lead flight attendant, now arriving from the front cabin, immediately sensed the seriousness of the situation. She listened carefully as Carter explained everything without exaggeration. He never mentioned race. He never accused anyone of discrimination. He simply described the facts, the expired meal, the refusal to replace it, the dismissive remarks, and the final comment that had crossed a line. The lead attendant's expression became increasingly serious. She turned toward her coworker. Please come with me. But now, without another word, the flight attendant followed her toward the galley, leaving behind a cabin filled with silence. As Carter looked out the window, he wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about something his late father used to tell him. People reveal their character when they think no one important is watching. Today, everyone had been watching, and the flight wasn't over yet. The cabin stayed unusually quiet after the 2 flight attendants disappeared behind the curtain leading to the galley. Conversations had stopped. Even the soft tapping of laptop keyboards seemed to fade. Carter leaned back in his seat and looked out the window, watching endless clouds drift beneath the aircraft. He took a slow breath, reminding himself why he had stayed calm from the beginning. This was never about proving a point. It was about making sure the next passenger didn't face the same treatment. A few minutes later, the lead flight attendant returned alone. Her professional smile had been replaced by a sincere expression. She stopped beside Carter's seat. Mr. Malachi, she said quietly, may I speak with you for a moment? Of course. She knelt slightly so they could speak without everyone listening. First, I'd like to apologize for what you've experienced today. I've personally inspected the meal you were served, and you're absolutely correct. It should never have been loaded onto this flight. Carter simply nodded. I appreciate you checking. We've removed every meal from the same catering batch until we can verify the rest. That statement caught the attention of nearby passengers. If one meal had expired, others might have been as well. The lead attendant continued. I've also spoken with several passengers who witnessed the conversation. Their accounts are consistent. She paused before adding, the remarks made to you do not reflect the standards of this airline. I wasn't looking for anyone to get in trouble, Carter replied. I only wanted someone to take the concerns seriously, and that's exactly what should have happened from the beginning. She offered him a fresh meal from a different catering section along with fruit, bottled water, and an apology card signed by the cabin crew. I hope you'll accept this. Thank you, Carter said. I will. Just as she turned to leave, the businessman across the aisle spoke up. Ma'am? She looked over. I travel almost every week for work, he said. I've seen passengers behave terribly toward airline staff. He glanced at Carter. This wasn't one of those situations. Several people nodded. He stayed respectful the whole time, another passenger added. He deserved better, said the woman seated behind him. The lead attendant acknowledged each comment with a grateful nod. Thank you. Your statements have been noted. Back in the galley, the atmosphere was very different. The flight attendant who had dismissed Carter sat silently while the lead attendant reviewed the incident with the captain over the aircraft's intercom system. Company policy was clear. Serving expired food was a serious safety concern. Disrespecting a passenger was another violation. Making a comment that could reasonably be interpreted as biased or discriminatory elevated the matter even further. Before the plane had even begun its descent, the captain had already requested that airline management and airport operations meet the aircraft upon arrival. What had started as a simple request for a replacement meal was no longer an in-flight disagreement. It had become a formal investigation. By the time the captain announced the aircraft's initial descent, word of the incident had quietly spread through the first-class cabin. No one was gossiping. They were talking about how calmly Carter had handled everything. He hadn't demanded compensation. He hadn't threatened anyone. He hadn't even raised his voice. He had simply insisted that the issue be acknowledged. As passengers prepared for landing, the lead flight attendant returned once more. "Mr. Malachi," she said, "our station manager and a member of our customer care team will be waiting to speak with you after we arrive. You are under no obligation, but they would appreciate the opportunity." Carter gave a polite nod. "I'll speak with them." The aircraft touched down smoothly, and a quiet round of applause broke out from a few passengers, a tradition that still lingered among some travelers. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Carter noticed two airline officials standing outside the jet bridge through the window. One wore a navy blazer with an airport identification badge, while the other carried a tablet and a folder. The cabin door opened. Instead of allowing everyone to disembark immediately, the lead flight attendant made a brief announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience today. We ask that you remain seated for just a moment while airport personnel board the aircraft." A murmur spread through the cabin. Within seconds, the station manager and a representative from customer relations stepped inside. They greeted the captain, exchanged a few quiet words with the lead flight attendant, and then walked directly toward Carter. "Mr. Malachi?" the station manager asked. "Yes, my name is Daniel Brooks. I'm the station manager. On behalf of the airline, I'd like to apologize for your experience today." He extended his hand. Carter shook it. "We've already reviewed the initial report from the cabin crew," Brooks continued. "However, we'd like to hear directly from you." Carter appreciated the question. Too often, people assumed they already knew the whole story. He calmly described everything exactly as it had happened, from noticing the expired date to requesting a replacement, the dismissive responses, and the comment that had changed the tone of the conversation. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't leave anything out. When he finished, Brooks looked at the customer relations representative. "Does that match the witness statements?" She glanced at her tablet. "Yes. Every passenger we've spoken with has described the incident almost identically." The businessman from across the aisle stepped forward before leaving the aircraft. "If you need another witness," he said, "I'm happy to provide a written statement." "So am I," the woman seated behind Carter added. Then another passenger volunteered, and another. Brooks looked around the cabin, visibly moved by what he was seeing. It wasn't just one customer making a complaint anymore. It was an entire section of passengers standing behind a man whose quiet dignity had earned their respect. For the first time that day, Carter allowed himself a small smile. He hadn't set out to change anyone's mind. He had simply refused to let respect expire before the meal did. The passengers slowly began leaving the aircraft, but the atmosphere felt different from a normal arrival. Several people paused beside Carter's seat before stepping into the aisle. The businessman extended his hand. "My name's Ethan Reynolds," he said. "I fly almost every week. I've seen people lose their tempers over the smallest inconvenience. What you did today took real self-control." Carter shook his hand with a modest smile. "My father used to tell me that if you're right, you don't have to be loud. You just have to be steady." Ethan nodded. "He sounds like a wise man." He was. One by one, other passengers stopped to offer a few kind words. The woman seated behind him smiled warmly. "I hope my children grow up handling difficult situations the way you did." "Thank you," Carter replied. "I hope they never have to." Once the cabin had emptied, the station manager invited Carter into a quiet meeting room near the gate. Inside were the customer relations representative, the lead flight attendant, and the captain. The captain stood as Carter entered. "Mr. Malachi, I'm Captain James Holloway. I want to personally apologize. The safety and dignity of our passengers are our responsibility. Today, we fell short." "I appreciate you saying that," Carter answered. The station manager opened a folder containing the preliminary incident report. "We've reviewed the catering records. The meal served to you was, in fact, expired. It should have been removed during pre-flight inspection." He paused before continuing. "We've also reviewed the statements from the crew and passengers. The conduct of the flight attendant involved violated multiple company policies." Carter remained silent, He wasn't interested in watching someone be humiliated. He only wanted accountability. Brooks looked him in the eye. Effective immediately, she has been removed from active duty, pending the outcome of our investigation. The room fell quiet. No one celebrated the announcement, not even Carter. He simply lowered his eyes for a moment. "I never asked for anyone to lose their job," he said softly. "I know," Brooks replied. "But our responsibility is larger than this single flight. This investigation isn't only about one conversation. It involves food safety, professionalism, and how passengers are treated when they raise legitimate concerns." The captain added, "Our decisions have consequences, so do our actions." Carter slowly nodded. "I understand." Before the meeting ended, Brooks handed Carter a written apology from the airline, along with reimbursement for the flight and travel vouchers. Carter accepted the envelope but said something that surprised everyone in the room. "I'll accept the apology," he said, "but if you really want to make this right, use this incident to train your employees. The next person who speaks up shouldn't have to wonder whether they'll be ignored." The station manager smiled. "Mr. Malachi, I believe that's exactly where we'll begin." 3 weeks passed, and Carter Malachi had almost put the flight behind him. Back on his farm in eastern Texas, life returned to its familiar rhythm. The sun came up before he did. Tractors rolled across the fields, and workers gathered every morning to plan the day's harvest. There were irrigation lines to repair, produce to inspect, and contracts to fulfill. The incident on the airplane felt like a distant memory. Then his phone rang. It was the airline's corporate office. "Mr. Malachi," the representative said, "we wanted you to know that our investigation has been completed." Carter stepped away from the equipment shed so he could hear clearly. "The employee involved is no longer with the company. The findings confirmed serious violations of our food safety procedures, customer service standards, and code of conduct." Carter closed his eyes for a brief moment. "I'm sorry it came to that." "So are we," the representative replied. "But we've also made several changes because of your report." She explained that the airline had introduced additional verification procedures for catered meals before boarding. Flight attendants would receive updated training on handling passenger concerns with professionalism, especially when safety issues were involved. "We've also incorporated your case into our employee training program," she added. "Without identifying you personally, we've used it as an example of why every concern deserves to be taken seriously." For the first time since the flight, Carter felt that something genuinely good had come from the experience. "Thank you," he said. "That's all I hoped for." A few days later, something unexpected happened. Ethan Reynolds, the businessman from first class, drove nearly 2 hours to visit Carter's farm. He climbed out of his pickup truck wearing jeans instead of the tailored suits Carter remembered. "I figured I should finally see where the man from Seat 2A spends his time," Ethan joked. Carter laughed. "You'll find there's a lot more dirt here than on an airplane." The two men spent the afternoon walking through rows of vegetables and fruit orchards. Ethan watched as Carter greeted every employee by name. He noticed that Carter worked alongside them instead of simply giving orders. During lunch, one of the younger farmhands asked Carter why everyone kept calling about an airplane. Carter smiled. "It wasn't really about an airplane. What was it about?" He looked across the fields before answering. "It was about remembering that every person deserves to be treated with respect. Whether they're wearing a business suit, work boots, or a flight attendant's uniform, dignity should never depend on appearances." The young man nodded thoughtfully. That lesson stayed with everyone who heard it, and Carter knew the real harvest from that flight had never been about compensation. It had been about planting accountability, where indifference had once grown. Nearly 6 months after the flight, Carter Malachi received a thick envelope in the mail. It wasn't another apology. It was an invitation. The airline was hosting its annual leadership and employee conference, where managers, pilots, flight attendants, and customer service staff from across the country gathered to discuss safety, professionalism, and customer care. The letter asked if Carter would be willing to share his experience. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't a public speaker. He was a farmer. He was more comfortable driving a tractor than standing behind a podium. But after thinking about it for a few days, he accepted. If telling his story could prevent even one person from being treated the way he had been, it was worth the trip. When Carter walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of airline employees looked toward the quiet man in worn leather boots and a simple button-down shirt. He didn't bring a prepared speech. He simply told the truth. He spoke about growing up on a farm where his parents taught him that honesty mattered more than pride. He explained how checking expiration dates had become second nature because food safety wasn't just a rule, it protected lives. Then he described the flight, not with anger, not with bitterness, just with facts. He admitted that what hurt most wasn't the expired meal. It was being treated as though my concern didn't matter, he said. You can replace a meal in 5 minutes. It's much harder to repair someone's dignity after you've taken it away. The room remained completely still. Many employees lowered their eyes, some quietly nodded, others wiped away tears. When Carter finished, the audience stood together in a long, heartfelt round of applause. The airline's chief executive officer walked onto the stage. "Mr. Malachi," she said, "your courage reminded us that accountability begins with listening. Because you refused to stay silent, and because you remained respectful while doing so, our company has become better." She presented him with a plaque recognizing his contribution to improving passenger safety and customer service. Carter accepted it with the same humility he had shown throughout his life. "This belongs on my farm office wall," he said with a smile, "not because it honors me, but because it reminds me that doing the right thing is always worth the effort." When he returned home, he hung the plaque beside an old photograph of his parents standing in a cotton field. Looking at both, he realized they represented the same lesson. Character isn't built during easy moments, it's revealed during difficult ones. The story of one expired meal eventually faded from the headlines and company reports, but the changes it inspired continued. Employees became more careful, passengers felt more heard, and somewhere, on another flight, a traveler raised a concern and was met with kindness instead of dismissal. That was the legacy Carter had hoped to leave. Not revenge, not recognition, just a reminder that every person deserves respect, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what they do for a living. Moral of the story: the greatest strength isn't found in raising your voice. It's found in standing firm with dignity, honesty, and self-control. Respect should never depend on a person's appearance, profession, or background. Real leadership begins when we listen, take responsibility, and choose to do what's right, even when it's inconvenient. From Carter Malachi's story, we learn that calm courage can be more powerful than anger, facts are stronger than assumptions, and dignity should never be compromised. One respectful person who refuses to ignore wrongdoing can inspire lasting change. May this story remind us to treat every individual with fairness, to speak up when something is wrong, and to remember that accountability and compassion always leave a greater legacy than pride. That's it for today. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments which part of this story touched you the most, or what lesson you learned from it. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel. See you in the next story.